Hey guys, I'm going to be doing the case study for a problem with inclusion for EDL 853. First category that I'm going to be looking at is identifying some problems and then analyzing them as well. First thing is I need to look at what do I know. So here are some things that I know about the situation currently. Mr. Barnes is the principal at Somerset High School. Mrs. Cooley is enrolling her son Stephen in the next couple of days. Stephen happens to be deaf. Mr. Barnes made the mistake of saying hearing impaired, and Mrs. Cooley corrected him and said that Stephen is actually deaf. Stephen is on an IEP plan, which stands for Individualized Education. Several teachers, including Mrs. Bell herself, have spoken out against inclusion in the past. She has said that it is not her job to educate all of those students. In fact, I remember her saying that other parents should be calling in and saying that their children are not getting the proper education because she has to spend all of her time working with the kids that are on IEPs. Mrs. Bell also happens to be the teacher's union representative, which gives her a lot of power. You also know that Stephen uses American Sign Language to communicate, which there are different forms of sign language, and he happens to use the American Sign Language to help communicate. Mr. Barnes' principal is going to have a meeting with the staff to let them know about Stephen and his IEP and his accommodations. Mrs. Thomas, the special education teacher, is currently looking for an interpreter for Stephen who may know American Sign Language. She's checking with the local college to see if they have anybody or if the school can pay for somebody to go take some classes so that they can help Stephen with his signing. Next thing I want to look at is the things that I need to know. First thing I need to know is whether or not an interpreter has been found for Stephen who uses American Sign Language. If no one has been found, then we need to make other arrangements and other accommodations to help meet his needs. The other thing that I'm very curious to find out, or that I need to know, is how Mrs. Bell and the rest of the staff are going to accept Stephen and his accommodations and the IEP that has been put in place to help Stephen be successful. The last step of category 1 there is to identify the problem, and the problem is getting all of the teachers on board to help Stephen be successful and follow his accommodations on his IEP. Category 2 is the proposed plan of action. Plan of action that I would first take would be I would meet with Mrs. Bell individually. And the reason I would meet with her individually first is because she does hold a lot of power, and that if I can get her on board and others, teacher and staff, see that she is on board, then they may jump on board a little bit more easily than if I try to get them all at the same time. I would help explain to her how important she is to this situation and that the influence that she has on the rest of the staff, and that if she buys into this, then everybody else will follow suit and buy in as well. After meeting with her, I would meet with all of Stephen's teachers and explain the situation and talk about some of the accommodations that are going on, some of the modifications that maybe need to be made in her classroom or their classroom, and talk about some of the action steps that we're going to be taking to following Stephen's IEP plan. Some of the strategies I've used I've already mentioned, but I would not accuse Mrs. Bell or staff of anything. I wouldn't bring up the fact that they have fought inclusion in the past, but I would explain the ways that they can help Stephen be successful and let them know that they are not on their own, that we are going to be helping and providing resources. The special education teachers will be helping. I will be helping personally, and so that they don't feel like they're on an island and are forced to find ways to help accommodate all on their own. Category 3 is making sure all the issues are resolved. First thing I always look at is what is best for students. I need to look at and make sure that I understand what is best for Stephen, and that is to be included within the regular ed classroom. I would also have the special ed teachers look for strategies and help implement them within the classroom so that Mrs. Bell and the other teachers don't feel like they are in charge of finding all of the accommodations and modifications all on their own. To help resolve the problem and come up with a resolution, I would have follow-up meetings with Mrs. Bell and Stephen's other teachers to make sure they are adequately providing for Stephen's needs. And I will also check with them to make sure that their needs as well, because those are important as well, are being met to help accommodate Stephen. Category 4, debriefing the problem. What I was thinking or feeling during this problem, it's important to support your teachers. It's important to know that they have your back at all, or that you have their back at all times. And at the same time, it's important to value each student's learning. You want to make a special effort to let Mrs. Cooley know that Stephen's needs are being met and that teachers and all staff are trying to provide for Stephen and help his stay at Somerset High School be a memorable one and one that he feels that he can have success in. Unresolved issues, I'm not sure exactly how Stephen's teachers, Mrs. Bell especially, will respond to having Stephen in their classroom. And at the same time, I'm not sure how Stephen will adapt to each individual teacher's classroom. Category 5, the things that I was feeling and kind of talking about some of the things that were going on in my head when I was trying to make sure that ISLIC Standard 3 was met. First one is I wanted to make sure I was managing and enhancing learning at the same time. And the way that I did that was I had meetings with Mrs. Bell and all the other teachers. And I also met with other counselors and special ed teachers. Second component was I wanted to make sure I was collaborating with all the stakeholders. I had follow-up meetings with teachers and about the accommodations. I would also make a point to check in with Stephen and see how he is adjusting to all of this. I would also check in with the counselor and special ed teachers to make sure that the regular ed classroom teachers are cooperating along with this process. And the third component was making sure I was obtaining resources. I was looking into finding an interpreter for Stephen, making sure someone who spoke American Sign Language, and also if Stephen needs additional resources, trying to make sure that I help find those and accommodate his needs at the same time. So that concludes my case study for Module 16. I hope you guys enjoyed listening. Thank you very much.